You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, when you hire a company to do work for your company, like an electrician or an accounting firm or a web services company, references are absolutely critical because a company is known by the company it keeps. Well, I'm Michael Mahfood with Group M7 Design, the oldest and largest web services company in East Texas with clients all over the country. And I wouldn't be doing this commercial if Group M7 didn't have Google's highest rated reference on their search engine under Website Design Tyler. In fact, we are rated higher than all of our competitors combined, 48 to be exact. Well, heck, after 26 years, I'd be personally devastated if we weren't number one. Look at our giant portfolio of hundreds and hundreds of our sites at the portfolio section at GroupM7.com. Then it'll make sense to you when I say that, well, since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's the highly rated Group M7 Design.
Welcome, Monsignor.
Thank you, Teresa.
We are in show number 19 of Volume 2.
Great, okay.
I know, it's great.
Yeah.
Having a great time with this. It's been some wonderful, wonderful programs.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about real estate.
Real estate. One thing I know about that is location.
That's right, yeah. The man I'm going to mention right away is a fellow by the name of George R. Taylor. And in 1841, he moved to St. Louis from Alexandria, Virginia. A lot of Virginians coming into St. Louis at the time, Kentuckians, Tennesseans, New Englanders, a lot of people moving in. He was a lawyer. That was his career, was as a lawyer. But what struck St. Louisans was when he moved to St. Louis, he built a building downtown. It was a 6-story building. The tallest building in St. Louis until then was 2 stories.
So that had to be impressive.
Yes, definitely. He made quite a name for himself. Then he turned around and financed another building, the premier hotel of St. Louis. It was called the Barnum, and it cost $200,000 to build. I've seen the pictures of it, the drawings, the etchings of it, and it must have been quite a hotel. Took 2 years in order to build. It became famous, especially for its restaurant, particularly a ragu stew. The Barnum ragu stew is famous. People talked about it.
That's interesting.
It was located down really what is now the Arch Grounds. Other buildings went up, especially after the fire of 1849 that gutted most of downtown. Remember, we talked about that, and almost miraculously, the old cathedral was spared, but most of the neighborhood around it was destroyed. And so other buildings began going up along 4th Street. On the east side, between Locust and Vine, there was an entire block of buildings called the 10 Buildings Project.
Okay.
You know, and they're all going to be offices and things of that nature. Each of them is 4 stories high, and they were financed by some names that are familiar to us here in St. Louis: James H. Lucas, Anna Lucas Hunt, who was a tremendous philanthropist for the church also. We mentioned her quite a bit. And then also William M. Morrison built those buildings. I think last time around we mentioned also that Archbishop Kenrick had gotten into the building process and built a couple buildings, turned around and sold those right on the old grounds of the Place d'Église, and made some good money off of that also. Along Chestnut Street between Main and 2nd Street, so again, we're talking about the Arch Grounds, imposing 2-story homes were built for prominent families, and it became known as Quality Row. One of the indicators of growth in the city is water usage, and there's been some interesting studies about that too. In 1830, there was a reservoir built. St. Louis, one of the nicknames of St. Louis was the Mound City because there were lots of Indian mounds. And to the north part of St. Louis, there were 2. And on one of those mounds, a reservoir that held 230,000 gallons of water was there. That water was pumped directly out of the Mississippi River, you can imagine the sediment came down to the bottom there, and the water was then pumped into the city. Pretty brown still. Well, later on I'm going to talk a little bit about Chicago water, which was a lot worse than St.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
But anyway, that's what we had. By 1850, they had to expand it to 400,000 gallons. And then the city went ahead and built another reservoir about a mile west on Cass Avenue, north of Cass Avenue, and that was 8 million gallons.
Wow.
So obviously,
8 million
yeah.
gallons.
But that proved to be inadequate, and another reservoir was built that held 32 million gallons. And by this time, by 1850, St. Louis had over 100,000 people in it. So you needed a lot of water. Now, all of this and all of the people moving into St. Louis caused a real flurry, as I say, in real estate activity and in home building. In 1841, North St. Louis, which was an independent city, was absorbed by the city of St. Louis. So it becomes an entity then. So when we talk about North St. Louis, we're talking about, of course, the northern part of St. Louis now.
Right.
But at that time, it was actually a township in between St. Louis and Baden. So that's absorbed in South St. Louis, which people always say is a geographic expression, not actually a township. Some people would call it an attitude or way of life. But South St. Louis also found more and more being brought into the realm of the city of St. Louis too.
Okay.
So there are a whole series of little developments in that area. Now, when we're talking about South St. Louis, we're not talking Cronolette. We're talking Soulard. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are a lot of little developments around there. Some of them are called Fairview, Lowell, Evans Place, Fairmount, Rock Point, Rose Hill. All of those are going to be absorbed by the city at this point. There are two St. Louis businessmen who are watching all of this and deciding to get involved in it too. And one of them is Hiram Leffingwell. There's a street in St. Louis named after him.
Yes.
And the other is Richard Elliott. And what they did was they published a little brochure called the Real Estate Register and began doing that in 1850. And what it did was it gathered all of the real estate information that was available in St. Louis. So they read through the newspapers. Remember, there are lots of newspapers, daily newspapers in St. Louis at the time. They watched all of the court sales. They took information on all of the auctions. And then what they did was they would put all of that into their little register. The idea is that someone who's interested in buying a home could go to their register for a couple pennies and find what's available in real estate. So you want to choose what part of the city you want to live in, what kind of a house, what it's built of, all of those sorts of things. But they were very clever, because what they did was, while they had all that information there, they made sure that the houses that they owned got a prominent spot.
Ah, okay.
So
okay.
it wasn't altruism. The idea was to steer the buyers towards
their
their
home.
property. Leffingwell and Elliott had another idea, too, for the city. They thought it would be a great idea, a grand idea, to build a street, a really true boulevard, around the outer limits of the city itself. The idea would be to take the crest of a hill beyond Jefferson. Okay, developments are happening already beyond Jefferson, and up to that top of that next rise, and then it would run that big boulevard from Cronolette in the south,
Okay.
and follow that rise all the way up into what it was called Bremen back at that time, 14th and Malincrot today, up in North St. Louis, and it would be just tremendous. So their idea was to build this in such a way that it would be one of the biggest streets in the world, 120 feet wide.
Okay.
One of the great boulevards. This would be the Champs-Élysées of St. Louis. They were proposing to name it after the Lindell brothers. The Lindells, particularly Peter Lindell, there were three brothers who came to St. Louis to make a fortune in real estate and merchandising. So they were going to name the street after them. This would be Lindell Boulevard. And the state of Missouri said no. They would only allow it to be 80 feet wide.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And as a result of that, the Leffingwell-Elliott proposal of calling it Lindell Boulevard was dropped. Of course, it would be picked up later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Instead, they were going to call it Grand Avenue.
Grand. Okay.
Yeah. We reflect on the geography of St. Louis is a series of rises. Mm-hmm. You know, you have that coming out of the levee itself, and there was that bluff, but by now that bluff had been willowed away. So that limestone Bluff was no longer there. But you came on up, and the first rise would bring you up to what is now Broadway, 4th Street, and the old courthouse there. And then you had this other prairie that took place all the way up to Jefferson.
Okay.
Now, by now, this has been filled also with people. So Jefferson Avenue is that next rise. And then you have another prairie that takes you all the way out to Grand. By this time, by the 1850s, you now have people moving out into that area. And in the center of that, going directly west, some really elegant neighborhoods are being built. By the time the Civil War comes to an end, they're starting to look beyond to the next rise, which is going to take you all the way to Skinker. These guys are planning all this stuff. They have all these great ideas and all. So you have all of these people moving in from Virginia, from Maryland, others from Kentucky, Tennessee, New England. And so one would think that the Catholic population is being diluted, but not necessarily so. That because of a lot of immigrants that are going to be coming into St. Louis at the same time and arriving, and they're going to be coming to various neighborhoods, and they're going to need churches. And right now, Archbishop Kenrick, in his first 10 years as Bishop of St. Louis, has built less than a half dozen churches.
Okay.
They're going to be needing a lot more. So you have the construction of St. Francis Xavier on Washington Avenue by the Jesuits. Bishop Kenrick was not happy about that. I think we mentioned that he was concerned that it was going to suck away all the English speakers out of the cathedral, and but it did not necessarily do. Connected to St. Francis Xavier and St. Louis University is a parish school for girls. And the Jesuits would open that school up and hand it over to the Sisters of Charity. The church itself was completed in 1843, and at the same time, the school for girls was opened up. Within 2 years, the enrollment was up to 280. And this was to be a free school. It was called St. Vincent's. And it actually had two departments to it, a free section and then also another section that charged tuition. And the idea was that the tuition side would help fund the free side.
Okay.
Yeah. So depending upon the family ability and to pay and all that. A school for boys was also founded. That was set up specifically for boys who are too young or not ready to go into the classical studies at the university.
Oh, okay.
The university itself, they always have a preparatory school for the university. So basically what we would have would be the equivalent of a high school and maybe a junior high for these boys. And then after a number of years, they would be prepared then to go into the university. But usually much younger than what we think of today. Today we typically think of an 18-year-old going into college, but maybe much more like 16 years old.
Okay.
Going in, yeah.
So then these would have been like the beginnings of the college prep schools, I guess?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And in fact, later on, you'll have the development, this new idea of a high school. And so you're going to have prep schools and academies standing equivalent to those high schools. Okay. We'll see when we get into the 20th century how that evolves.
Okay.
Very interesting stuff. Bishop Kenrick gave $1,000 from the Thornton estate to St. Vincent's for supporting the free school. As he looked around, he also knew that south of the cathedral, that Bishop Rosati had bought property intending to build a church for the German Catholics who were living in that area. That eventually is what he's going to do. Up until then, the Germans attended Mass at St. Aloysius Chapel near the university. When that got too big, then one Mass was given to them at the old cathedral. Of course, the Masses were always celebrated in Latin, but the sermons would be in German, and the opportunity to go to confession, of course, in their own language then too. Well, now, with more and more Germans living in that area, it became important to build a church, and so that's how St. Mary of Victories is established. The original building cost $8,000.
For St. Mary of Victory?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Couldn't do that now.
I know you wouldn't go very far now. Archbishop Kenrick wrote to the Leopoldine Society, and the director of that was an Austrian bishop. That was Archbishop Milde. He had mentioned to him in this letter that even so, with that $8,000 invested, they still owed $2,000 on the building. And he pointed out that most of the Germans living in that area were working class and could not afford to pay that other $2,000. Ultimately, the Leopoldine Society went in and paid off that debt for them.
They did. Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Remember, this is the same group of parishioners that Father Heim helps out by establishing the parish bank.
Yes, which is then Kenrick ran with.
Right, yeah. Brought over to the cathedral and brought Father Heim with him. In May of 1845, another church is established in the northern part of the city. That's St. Patrick's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on 6th and Biddle.
Is it still open?
No.
Okay.
It was when I was a kid, because when I was in first grade, I got to tell you this story. When I was in first grade, I was walking to school to St. Patrick's in University City.
Uh-huh.
And one of the parishioners living on our block was a businessman, and he stopped and asked if I'd like a ride. Now, this is a different era. Back in those days, people did that. And I said yes. And so I got in. I'm in first grade. Okay. Get in the car. He drove me all the way downtown, dropped me off in front of St. Patrick's on 6th and Biddle. And all I remember is getting out of the car, knowing nowhere, I have no idea where I am, and I just started crying.
Oh.
And he said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "This isn't my school." And that's when he realized it was St. Patrick's University City. He had to drive me all the way back. Yeah. After that, I didn't take any rides. I always walked to school.
How far were you from school?
Oh, about a 10-minute walk. Yeah, really. Oh well, I'll never forget it. But this is the St. Patrick's downtown, 6th and Biddle.
That's awesome.
The Biddle family was very generous in setting up this parish. They donated heavily to it, and then afterwards added significantly already to the diocese. But still in all, that's still going to be more debt that the Archdiocese gets involved in. 6 months later, Bishop Kenrick consecrates another church, this on the south side, and this is St. Vincent de Paul, which is still with us today.
Yes.
The parish was put in the hands of the Vincentian fathers as it is today. They continue to lead that parish, but it was a real challenge back then because they had to be trilingual.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were still French Creoles living in that area. The new population moving in is going to be Irish speaking English and German speaking German.
Wow.
So the Vincentians had to be able to function in 3 languages, plus Latin, in order to run that parish. That's pretty incredible.
That church has always amazed me, how it always looks like you can touch it from the interstate, from the highway,
Yeah.
The highway runs right smack in front of it. But I have never been inside the church.
I haven't either.
And I hear it's beautiful.
Yeah, I can
I
well
haven't
imagine.
been in there.
Yeah, I'll do that someday.
Yeah, so that would be great.
Yeah. Well, it's the incredible generosity of working class families that built these churches.
Yes.
It's a real tribute to their deep faith and their eagerness to preserve their own culture. And certainly that was true of St. Vincent's. Right away, St. Vincent's also opened up a parochial school. This was under the direction of Father John Ulan. He was there in that parish from 1851 to 1885 at the time of his death.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Somebody who's been there and associate with that parish.
And you find in this era, in the late 19th century, that happening more and more often. Although there's a real revolving door, he's the stabilizing factor.
He's the one, but
Yeah.
others came in.
But the others came in and left right away. So as the population grew in the area and school enrollment increased, the school was divided into 2 parts, the boys section and the girls section. The boys section was put under the directorship of the Christian Brothers, and the girls were under the Sisters of Charity. So by 1850, the Christian Brothers first appeared here in St. Louis, and they set up their own school, St. Patrick's Academy, which was meant to be a business school. And interestingly enough, St. Patrick's Academy, it was in German. And then they rapidly began being invited into these grade schools. Eventually, of course, they would found their own college, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on with Christian Brothers College. Back to St. Vincent's, founding pastor of St. Vincent's was not Father Ulan. He was there right from the early part in working with the school, but the founder was Father Francis Xavier Dahmen. Father Dahmen was a German from the Rhineland, in the Western Germany. He had served as a cavalryman in Napoleon's army.
Wow.
Yeah. Father Dahmen seems to have had a happy-go-lucky characteristic about him. His abilities as far as finances and administration were really bad. And so luckily he had another priest who would take care of all of those. So you've got 3 priests there now. Okay, you've got Father Dahmen, who is the founding pastor, Father Ulan, who is very much involved in the working of the school, and now you also have Father Blasius Raho. I don't know what nationality that is, but I have to say that Father Dahmen fits in to that trilingual thing. He speaks English, but his native language is German, but he served in the French cavalry, so he speaks French also. So perfect man for that job. But as I say, there's a constant turnover. In 1847, Father Raho was sent to New Orleans. Then another priest was sent from the Vincentian Seminary to run St. Vincent's. This is Father Francis Burlando, and he was there for 3 years when he was transferred, and he was replaced by Father Dahmen, who returned, but only for 2 years. And then he was replaced. His replacement served for 2 years, and then he's replaced by another. This is an Irishman, Father John O'Reilly, who came in and served for 2 years.
That is a lot of transition.
Yeah.
That's more like the transitional deacons movement rather than the...
Yeah, really, yeah. So St. Vincent's weathered a lot of changes as far as pastors go, but you always had Father Ulan there. Also at this time, back at the cathedral, you have some interesting developments happening. There's a group of laymen who met with Archbishop Kenrick on November 20th of 1845. 4 laymen. 2 of them were doctors. Moses Linton, who had worked with the Sisters of Charity quite a bit. Thomas Anderson. And then another was a judge. This is Brian Malamphy. He's the son of John Malamphy, the single richest man in St. Louis, and the founder of that Catholic hospital.
Yes.
And then the 4th man was John Everhart, and they formed this committee. We're going to talk about this, I think, next time around a little bit, but what they did was they went to the bishop and asked if they could bring to America something that Brian Malamphy had discovered in France when he was visiting in Paris. And it's called the St. Vincent de Paul Society.
Okay.
So what happens is that Malamphy had met Friedrich Ozanam, and was so impressed with what was being done there, the poor of Paris being helped. You know, Ozanam himself attracted 1,000 men in Paris alone into this society to do direct service to the poor. He's an interesting man. He comes from a Jewish Catholic background. And he founds the society in Paris in 1833. By the time Malamphy found out about it, there were already chapters in Rome, Brussels, London, Dublin, and even Constantinople.
Wow.
And the one in St. Louis would become the first in the Western Hemisphere.
That impresses me. And so I think we're going to end here, but
Yeah.
But I know we'll talk about next show.
A little bit more, yeah.
St. Louis being the first.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we close with a prayer and your blessing?
Sure. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
And may Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Monsignor.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.